Big Brother, mainstream media, government cover-ups. You want answers? Well, so does he. Live from Austin, Texas, broadcasting worldwide, it's Alex Jones.
Gregory is our guest for the next 30 minutes. He's the editor of the Epoch Times English language version. All I know is I'm in London. I see their newspaper on newsstands. I'm in Toronto. I'm in Dallas. I'm in Los Angeles. I mean, I just see it everywhere. I see it in Austin for more than a decade, and it's theepochtimes.com, and they have an amazing report that we link to on Infowars.com. We link to part 1, but there's also a part 2. Chinese pianist plays propaganda tune at the White House. U.S. humiliated in eyes of Chinese by song used to inspire anti-Americanism. Now, we know the Chinese people are greatly oppressed. They're great people. We know that Mao Zedong has the greatest mass murder record in history, even greater than the monster Hitler and the monster Stalin. But to have them play this song, The Motherland, that's in a popular movie in China dealing with the Chinese regulars fighting Americans in Korea during the Korean War, is just incredible. And this was aired. Chinese TV covered it. Chinese bloggers praised it. Lang Lang, the pianist, talked about he chose it to basically glorify China. I mean, it's one thing to have Hu Jintao come out before he came last week and say, the dollar's going down, the Chinese currency will be the world reserve currency, China being the biggest holder of our debt. What an amazing move we see. But to see all these other slights that Americans don't recognize, but in China are seen as rubbing our face in it. Imagine if an American president went over there and played some anti-Chinese song or had their pianist do it. So it's really kind of an inside joke for, I guess, 1.3 billion Chinese, but a lot of them aren't laughing. And so joining us is the editor, Stephen Gregory of the EpochTimes.com. Again, their online version, their print version, very powerful around the world, very effective, and pro-liberty. And we really appreciate their report. They were the only East Coast newspaper to report on Bilderberg 2008 when I was there covering Obama and the fact that they'd made the deal to have him get the nomination. When he was, quote, out of pocket and none of the other media could find him. It was the Epoch Times that covered, to give you an idea of the work they do. And they've got a lot of other important articles dealing with people that were paid to greet Hu Jintao last week. And so he joins us now, hopefully about 5 minutes in the next hour. But, Mr. Gregory, good to have you here with us.
It's great to be with you, Alex.
Tell us about, because talking to folks at the paper, you really are one of the biggest experts on what's happening in China, what this song means and if it ties into a larger pattern.
Yes, certainly. This song was the theme song for a movie called Battle on Shangangling Mountain. And this was a battle, Triangle Hill, which is not well known to Americans, but in the Chinese Communist Party narrative about the Korean War, it's very important. It's treated as a major victory over U.S. forces. And the song is a praise of how beautiful China is, but at the end of the song, there's a verse which says that when friends are here, there is fine wine, but as the jackal comes, what greets it is the hunting life. And in the song, the jackal is the United States. And since that movie played for decades now in China, this song has been the leading song for promoting anti-Americanism in China. And so for this song to be played in the White House at a state dinner with President Obama and Hu Jintao present was a tremendous insult to the United States. Going into the White House and playing a song that promotes hatred of and opposition to the United States.
Well, if I played the old country music song from the 50s, in 1814, we took a little trip along with Colonel Jackson and the mighty Mississippi. We took a little bacon and we took a little beans, and we whipped the bloody British at the town of New Orleans. And it goes on from there about running the British down to the Gulf of Mexico. That was 220-something years ago. This is This is different because this is something that's currently popularized, and you link in the article written by Matthew Robertson to the celebrations in China and the fact that the message was clearly taken. Can you talk about this history of humiliations of America and why it's being done from your view, and why they would do this right there at a White House dinner with President Obama in attendance?
Sure. Alex, I think the fundamental thing is that the Chinese Communist Party has recognized from the very beginning that they are in a life and death struggle with the democratic West. As long as the United States exists as a free, democratic, and prosperous country, the example of the United States is a rebuke to the authoritarianism of the CCP. No matter how strong the propaganda is inside China, our example is still attractive to the Chinese.
But if they can lobby our government to crack down on internet speech and free speech zones, now it can normalize their authoritarian system. And to see our media, and I'm sorry to interrupt, that's powerful what you just said, though, sir, the editor of the Epoch Times. I've now seen our media actually praising China and saying they can get things done, and almost no criticism of their unbelievable human rights degradations.
Yes, the media in the West, and this is also to get back to your point about there being a pattern involved in this, a pattern of humiliation of the United States. The media in the United States has badly misunderstood China, the Chinese Communist Party, and the Chinese Communist regime, and since Nixon went to China in 1972, U.S. presidents and U.S. administration have badly misunderstood and been badly informed about the Chinese Communist Party. And so what the United States administrations have not understood is the CCP views this as an enemy, and an enemy that they have a long-term plan to defeat or subvert. And our policy towards China of engagement has been an attempt to treat them as friends. And this has been simply very naive. We can trade with the Chinese. We can, of course, have all kinds of relations with the Chinese. We should be very clear-headed about what the CCP is and what the CCP is doing. When Nixon visited China in 1972, there was a picture that was used throughout China after his visit. Nixon is getting off the plane, and he has a big grin on his face, and he's stretching his arm out to shake hands with Zhou Enlai. Joe at that time had a bad arm, and his arm is held close to his body. His face is very close. And what the Chinese propagandists did with this picture, which shows Nixon reaching out and Joe with his hand close to his body, is to say, look how badly the United States wants to reach out to it. They're reaching out to us. Now, this is a tiny, subtle detail, but it's how the Chinese people have been indoctrinated by the CCP to begin thinking about the United States from the very beginning.
Why does Obama continue to bow? I noticed when he bowed last year and again this week to Hu Jintao, that Hu Jintao just didn't even tip his head in any way. How is that being received in China?
I think that in general, Chinese propaganda is going to play up any opportunity to show the United States as weak, or the United States as being subservient towards China. As for President Obama's tipping of the head towards Hu Jintao, this is his understanding of democratic manners, my understanding about how to relate to foreign heads of state. And I would simply say that in the context of the relationship with the Chinese regime, I don't believe that's helpful to bow to Chinese heads of state.
So where is all this going? Because I'm not a China expert, but, compared to the general public, I read about it every day and try to study it, and have studied the history of China. I mean, I read the Chinese government-approved publications, and for those that don't know, they shut down the only free magazine that had been up a few years in China just a month ago. So all publications are approved, and I read the big Chinese dailies, and it's America is weak. We own their debt. They are our enemy. We're preparing for war against them. We are encircling dismantling them. They've got 90+% of rare earth mineral mines all over the world. They're giving out more money than the IMF and World Bank now to third world countries. I mean, China obviously is racing around. They lobbied to get our Panama Canal. I see all sorts of warlike statements by them. I don't see it out of the Russians. If I saw it out of the Russians, I'd be talking about it. And it really is a threat. I know it's come out in our news. They've been caught selling AK-47s to street gangs 14 years ago. They've got thousands of front companies. And Chinese mafia is unfolding, controlled by the government. I mean, I do see China as a very serious threat, especially because our own government at so many corporate levels have sold out to them. I mean, am I overstating that? Or, I mean, as somebody who's deeply researched this, the editor of the Epoch Times, give us your take on it.
The Chinese regime has been using every means available to them to weaken the position of the United States. So I don't think you're overstating it. But I do think that we need to be clear. If the United States is simply clear on its own principles and stays firm on its own principles and its own understanding of human rights and lets that guide its policy, the Chinese regime appears to be very strong. In fact, it's very weak. In 2009, Radio Free Asia had an interview with a professor at Beijing University, and he was quoted as saying that in 2009 there were over 200,000 mass protests, mass riots in China. That is a huge, huge number. And what it points to is the Chinese regime is rapidly deteriorating. There's great instability in
Well,
China.
that was my next point. They've got these entire new cities they've built that are almost entirely empty, this real estate bubble. I see the YouTube videos that quickly get pulled down by the Google parent company, who's in bed with the Chinese communist. And there's this illusion that the Chinese people are anti-America, but I think what you're saying and what I've researched is that they're trying to create a fake communist nationalism against the U.S. to rally their people against the U.S. and the West so their people won't rally against the authoritarian, hardcore oppression. And I see the YouTube videos of farmers having their tiny pieces of land taken, rushing Chinese troops with guns and even, defeating them. And so absolutely, China is on the verge of revolution, and China doesn't want us knowing that. Meanwhile, our Western governments are almost like trying to prop them up. Break that down.
Yeah, I think there are two things, at least two things going on at the same time. One is the Chinese people, who are the greatest victims of the Chinese Communist Party's oppression and regime. The Chinese people are deeply poisoned by the propaganda of the Chinese regime. That's on the one hand. On the other hand, the Chinese people increasingly are recognizing that the Chinese Communist Party's rule has to end. One of the biggest unreported stories in the world, something the Epoch Times has devoted a lot of space to, is what's called in Chinese the Tuidong movement, the movement to withdraw from the Chinese Communist Party. At this moment, 88 million Chinese in China and around the world have withdrawn either from the Chinese Communist Party or its affiliated youth organization. And this is something which the Chinese Communist Party is very afraid of. Falun Gong practitioners are taking the lead in helping the Chinese people in China understand the nature of the CCP and understand how catastrophic the CCP has been for China.
Why is China so threatened, the Chinese Communist Party, separate from the people, by the Falun Gong, A, and then B, here's an example. Paul Watson, the editor of PrisonPlanet.com, one of my big news sites, lives in England. His wife is Ehan Watson, and she speaks perfect English. She's, I guess you'd say, Anglified. But she has family, that lives in China, really nice folks. And she just wrote an article or contributed to it about a RAND Corporation document about war with China. And it wasn't even an anti-Communist Party article. It was just a dry piece. And they got word, their family got threatened, they got word, you shut up, you don't write. Now, she is British, and there's the long arm of the Chinese Communist Party telling her, you shut up. Trying to tell my website, you shut up. I mean, what have you guys gone through with the fact that you're reporting on them?
Well, from the very beginning, the Epoch Times has experienced a lot of interference in the CCP. I mean, one of their top priorities is to shut us down. In 2000, we had a reporters bureau inside China. Of course, it didn't operate openly; it operated clandestinely. But this was a bureau in a couple of cities, and in December of 2000, we had several dozen people who worked for us scooped up in raids, and many of them were sentenced to prison. They suffered severe torture. We have columnists at the Epoch Times, columnists who write for the Epoch Times in the last 4 years.
Unfortunately, sir, your phone started breaking up there. Try to speak right into your microphone and repeat about your reporters getting scooped up.
Okay. Is this better, Alex?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. In 2000, we had several dozen reporters inside China get scooped up in raids. Many of them were sentenced to prison. Many of them suffered severe torture. In major cities around the West, there have been our paper has been interfered with in many ways by the Chinese Communist Party. In Hong Kong, thugs that were employed by the CCP broke into our offices there and smashed our printing press there. So, you know, their opposition to us has been very strong because we give our Chinese language edition communicates directly over the web and in print to Chinese inside China and around the world, and it's delivering a message, of course, about the CCP. The CCP does not want the Chinese people to be here.
Well, incredible that these type of things could go on. Where do you see China going? I know it's hard to predict, but where do you see China in its relationship to the West going, in relationship to its own domestic operations going? And then I want to come back and get into some of the documented abuses that this government metes out to people.
Sure. I see the Chinese regime at this time becoming very arrogant and more aggressive around the world. Laid claim to the entire South China Sea. It is having navigation disputes with the U.S. Navy in the Yellow Sea. And so from one point of view, I see this as a very dangerous time. If there's a miscalculation in Korea, there could be a war could break out around Korea. If the Chinese regime feels that they're strong enough, they might attempt to conquer Taiwan. And so I see the Chinese regime becoming more aggressive on the one hand. On the other hand, I see it becoming much weaker.
All right, Mr. Gregory, stay there. Sorry to interrupt you. We got to go to break. I want to hold you for this short segment coming up and one more till 5 after if you can. Then, folks, I'm going to get into a bunch of economic news, police state news with the Super Bowl, and a lot more. Also, our V for Victory Against Tyranny campaign. Already seeing some huge success just 3 days into it. We'll be right back with our guest. If you think that the Communist Party thugs that have been feeding on the Chinese people and others like vampires are our friends, I got a bridge that I'm ready to sell you. I got some oceanfront property in Arizona, as George Strait would say. Going back to Stephen Gregory of EpochTimes.com, the editor of their English language version. Okay, you got interrupted by the break. You were getting into their extreme arrogance, evidenced by at the White House playing an anti-America song about, you know, the victory against U.S. troops. Continuing, please.
Right. Well, that's, and on the one hand, I see their arrogance increasing and their aggression increasing. On the other hand, I see the regime growing more and more unstable. And the members of the CCP know this. High-ranking members of the CCP have numerous foreign passports and billions stashed abroad. They're ready to run. And what the West needs to do is to support those inside China who are seeking to have a civil society. And that goes back to the withdrawal movement I was speaking of before. There are people inside China who are looking to end the Chinese Communist Party, and those are the people the West should be seeking out to support.
But there are a lot of Western megacorporations that promote the authoritarianism because they've got business deals that count on the slave labor. What about that part of the equation?
It's certainly true that there are corporations, Western corporations in China that are devoted to the regime. It's also true that this year, for the first time, the American Chamber of Commerce pulled back from its support for doing business in China. American business and Western business have been badly burned inside China. They have not been willing to admit it. And now people are finally starting to take a little bit more sober look at what it means to do business with China.
Sure. I've been asking a lot of the questions here, but you really are, from doing my research, a deep expert on what's happening with China. In the rest of this segment, the next, you've got the floor on other points you think are really important, and the persecution of Falun Gong, who they are for folks that don't know.
Great. Thank you. Okay, so we're still live. I'm sorry. I thought we were going to...
No. You've got the floor. Break it down for us as we go to break here.
Okay, right. The persecution of Falun Gong is a story that our paper has covered because it's the most important story, we think, in China today, we think in the world today. 100 million people were practicing Falun Gong, which is a peaceful spiritual practice, in China in 1999. And this scared the Chinese Communist Party. And because it scared the Chinese Communist Party to have 100 million people independently doing a meditation practice, spiritual practice, they decided to eradicate Falun Gong, in the words of Jiang Zemin. And they have used the most extreme and violent means, the most extreme forms of torture and brainwashing that can be imagined to attempt to eliminate the practice of Falun Gong in China. But what has happened is, for the first time in the history of the Chinese Communist Party, a group has successfully resisted the attempt to eliminate them. And this is a huge story in terms of the dynamics inside China, that you now have tens of millions of people who are conducting a campaign of civil disobedience to oppose the rule of the Chinese Communist Party. And this is something which readers of our newspaper and our website know about, and we think that media around the world should be paying close attention to this. It's an amazing development.
Well, I agree with you. Briefly, do you think it would have gone better for the Communist Party China to have let Falun Gong operate? Has it caused a bigger backlash by them trying to crush it?
I think if the Chinese Communist Party had allowed Falun Gong to continue peacefully cultivating, peacefully practicing Falun Gong, that China would be a different place today.
All right, stay there. Back in 1 minute. I want to continue down that line and where you see China ending.
Chinese people have felt that intensely, and the Chinese Communist Party has throughout its history played on that. And so by playing this song and by allowing this song to be played in the White House, the Chinese Communist Party is sending a signal to the Chinese people that things have turned, things have changed, that the Chinese Communist regime is now getting the upper hand.
Which they see as bolstering themselves domestically at a time when resistance to their tyranny is rising.
Exactly. That the appeal to patriotism and the appeal to nationalism is one of the strongest cards that the Chinese Communist Party has had to play.
And by not rebuking it and by not having the government speak out against it here, is that not aiding and abetting this?
I think the United States government would do well to acknowledge what happened and to register a complaint. I think that speaking silent, staying silent, I think the wrong course.
Yeah, the wrong message. Stephen Gregory, editor of theepochtimes.com. Folks need to go and subscribe there. In fact, stay there. I want to come back and briefly talk about how folks subscribe. There was one final point I wanted to hit with Stephen Gregory of the epochtimes.com online and physical newspaper, and that is how do folks subscribe and get hard copies? Because when I'm around the world or here in the U.S., I see it everywhere for years, many years, at least a decade, and pick it up and read it and go through it. Very pro-liberty. They report on the Bilderberg Group here domestically. A lot of things that other mainstream newspapers won't do. I wanted to do that, but before we plug how folks can get involved with you guys and read it online or get the hard copy, you have another article up at the Epoch Times. Photos show that Chairman Hu's welcomers were paid. Spend a minute or two on that, Mr. Gregory, and then let's tell folks how to subscribe to the Epoch Times.
Sure. One of the things that people in the West don't understand about the CCP is how hard they work to try and control civil society inside the United States. most Chinese community groups and the Chinese Student and Scholar Associations, which all Chinese students studying in the United States belong to, are heavily influenced or controlled by the Chinese Communist Party. These are called front groups. And so when Hu Jintao visited Washington, D.C., the embassy mobilized these front groups, in particular the students, and paid them to come welcome the welcome Hu. This welcome has at least two purposes, and one is to push aside the those who come to protest Hu Jintao. The welcome groups know in advance that Hu is coming, and so they're able to apply for permits before those who might protest him, and they can get the best spot. And so the spot directly opposite the Blair House, for instance, would be occupied by the Chinese students who've been paid to come and welcome Hu Jintao. And, of course, the other purpose is to give American media and the American public and American leaders perception that the people of China are very strongly pro-Chinese Communist Party and very strongly pro-Hu Jintao. But the reality is that while these students may have strong patriotic feelings for China, they're paid to be there, and we can't take at face value, you know, these
Sure, this is perception management. How do folks get hard copies of your newspaper?
If they go to our website, which is www.theepochtimes.com, www.theepochtimes.com, in the top right-hand corner of the website is a tab that says Get Home Delivery, and if they click on that, then they can enter their zip code, and we will get back to them about establishing home delivery. We are in major cities around the world, but we don't have the wide distribution, U.S.-wide distribution that we hope to. So, but in any case, click on Get Home Delivery on the website and
all right,
get in touch with us. Thank you.
All right, sir. Good talking to you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Alex.
All right, take care. Oh, there goes the editor of the Epoch Times. And again, I've seen them cover Bilderberg Group, the New World Order. I've seen them cover it all. They were the only paper on the East Coast 3 years ago when I was at Bilderberg covering Obama being selected there when Hillary and Obama disappeared for a day and no one could find them in D.C. And they loaded up the Obama press corps and flew him to Chicago, closed the door. They said, "Where's Obama?" We knew where he'd be at the Bilderberg Group meeting. We were there. And the Epoch Times was also there. So certainly a lot of great stuff and trying to support alternative media. That's our job, and that's why I'm promoting what they're doing.